A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You ever buy a piece of tech because the marketing promised you a self-healing, infinite web of connectivity, only to find yourself staring at a smart bulb that won't turn on while you're standing 3 feet away from it? It is the classic smart home betrayal. You're holding your phone, you're pressing the virtual button, and nothing. It feels like the digital equivalent of being ghosted by your own living room.
Herman Poppleberry here, and Corn, you are touching on the entire mesh industrial complex. The marketing for Zigbee and Z-Wave makes it sound like magic. This idea that because it is a mesh, it is inherently invincible. People treat it like a digital sourdough starter, where you just keep adding flour and it grows forever. But in reality, it is a very finite resource with some hard physical and architectural ceilings. It's like a highway system. Just because you can add more lanes doesn't mean the interchange at the center can handle 10,000 cars a minute. Eventually, the toll booth, which is your coordinator, becomes the bottleneck. Think about a crowded cocktail party. If 5 people are talking, everyone hears everyone. If 500 people are in that same room, even if they are all repeating what they hear, the noise floor rises so high that the person standing next to you might as well be on Mars.
Well, today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that. He is asking about Zigbee coordinators and the actual limits of scaling these networks. He specifically mentions the SMLI series, which we both know is the current darling of the power user community, and he wants to know when these things actually start to sweat. Plus, the million-dollar question, can we treat multiple coordinators like Wi-Fi access points to blanket a mansion in Zigbee goodness? Daniel is essentially asking if he can build a corporate campus level of connectivity in a residential setting.
It is a phenomenal prompt because it hits that intersection of, it sounds simple on the box, and it is incredibly complex once you have 100 devices. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 1.5 Flash, which is fitting since we are talking about high-performance coordination and processing at the edge.
Let's start with the mesh part. The marketing says every device makes the network stronger. Daniel calls this out as having a big caveat. So, Herman, why isn't my battery-powered motion sensor making the network stronger for my door lock?
This is the fundamental misunderstanding of Zigbee roles. In a Zigbee network, you have 3 types of players: the coordinator, which is the brain, the routers, which are the backbone, and the end devices, which are the leaves. The caveat Daniel is talking about is that battery-powered devices, your sensors, your buttons, your contact triggers, are almost always end devices. They do not repeat signals. They are selfish. They wake up, whisper their data to a parent, and go back to sleep to save battery. If they acted as routers, they'd be dead in 3 days, because they'd have to keep their radios listening 100% of the time to catch and pass on messages from their neighbors. Imagine a bucket brigade where half the people are taking a nap. The water isn't moving very far.
So if I have a house full of 50 battery sensors and 1 hub, I don't actually have a mesh. I have a very crowded star topology. It's basically 50 people trying to shout at one librarian at the same time.
Precisely. You only get a mesh if you have routers, which are typically mains-powered devices like smart plugs, wired switches, or some bulbs. But even then, there is a bad neighbor problem. If you use certain smart bulbs as routers, especially older ones like the famous singles or even some early Hue bulbs, and someone flips the physical wall switch off, that part of your mesh just dies. It is like a bridge that disappears whenever someone turns off the lights on the deck. All the sensors that were talking through that bulb are suddenly stranded. They start frantically searching for a new parent, which drains their battery and floods the airwaves with "Where am I?" packets. This is what we call a routing storm. It's the digital equivalent of a GPS recalibrating while you're driving 60 miles an hour through a tunnel.
That is why people buy those dedicated IKEA or EOTech repeaters, right? They're just always-on routers that don't have a light bulb attached to them that might get switched off by a confused guest. They're like the permanent infrastructure of the city.
Right. They are pure infrastructure. But even with good routers, you hit the coordinator bottleneck. Daniel mentioned the SML-HD series, specifically things like the SLZB-06. These use the Texas Instruments CC2652P chip, which is a beast compared to the old CC2531 sticks we used to use, but it still has limits. Think of the CC2531 like a 1990s pager and the SML-Lite like a modern smartphone. It's better, but you still can't run a whole corporation off one phone.
But why is that? If the SM-Lite Stite has a powerful antenna and a fast processor, why can't it just handle everything? Is it a memory issue or a radio frequency issue?
It's both. Every device in a Zigbee network needs an entry in the routing table and the neighbor table of the coordinator. These tables are stored in RAM on the Zigbee chip itself. If you have 200 devices, the coordinator has to remember the best path to reach every single one of them. If that table fills up, the coordinator literally forgets how to talk to your backdoor sensor. It has to drop an old entry to make room for a new one. It's like trying to memorize a phone book. Eventually, names start falling out of your head.
Okay, let's get into the numbers. If I'm running an SLZB-06, which is a high-end consumer coordinator, how many devices are we talking about before the wheels fall off? Is it 50? 500? Daniel seems worried that even with high-end gear, there's a glass ceiling he's going to hit.
It is less about the total number and more about the direct child limit versus the network limit. A coordinator like the SLZB-06 can usually only talk to about 32 to 50 devices directly. If you want more than that, you must have routers to offload those connections. Now, the total network capacity for that specific chip is technically around 200 devices. If you step up to the newer SLZB-06M or the Ultra models using the EFR32 or newer chips, you might push 300 or 400. But, and this is a huge but, just because the chip cans hold 400 addresses in its table doesn't mean it can process the traffic of 400 devices simultaneously.
200 sounds like a lot, until you realize a modern smart home has a sensor on every window, every door, motion in every room, leak sensors under every sink, and then you add the lights. It adds up fast. I mean, a 3-bedroom house could easily hit 150 devices if you're thorough. But what does overwhelmed actually look like? Does the coordinator just catch fire?
I wish it were that dramatic. It's actually much more annoying. It starts with latency. You walk into the kitchen, the motion sensor triggers, and the lights come on 2 seconds later. You check the logs in Zigbee-2M QTT or Home Assistant, and you see adapter busy or MAC no ACK errors. Basically, the coordinator is trying to manage the routing tables, handle the security keys, and process incoming packets, and it just runs out of air. It's like a waiter trying to take orders for 50 tables at once. Eventually, he just stands in the middle of the floor staring into space because he can't decide who to help first.
Is it just the count, or is it the chattiness of the devices? Because I imagine a power monitoring plug that reports every half second is a lot heavier than a temperature sensor that checks in once every 10 minutes.
That is the hidden killer. If you have 50 plugs reporting energy usage constantly, showing you every single watt your fridge or TV is pulling, you are saturating the bandwidth. Zigbee is a low bandwidth protocol. We are talking 250 kilobits per second shared across the entire 2.4 gigahertz channel. Compare that to Wi-Fi 6, which is gigabits. When you have high-frequency reporting, you get packet collisions. The coordinator spends all its time asking for retransmissions. It's like trying to have a conversation in a room where everyone is shouting their bank balance every 5 seconds. You can't hear the person trying to tell you the house is on fire.
So, the just add more repeaters advice might actually make things worse if you're already at the bandwidth limit. I've seen people on forums say, my network is slow, so I added 5 more smart plugs, and then they wonder why it got even slower.
It can. Every hop a packet takes through a repeater adds latency and increases the chance of a collision. If a signal has to jump through 4 bulbs to get to the coordinator, that is 4 times the airtime used for a single message. It is why you want a flat mesh where most things are only 1 or 2 hops away from the coordinator rather than a long chain. If you have a long, skinny house and your coordinator is at one end and a signal has to hop through 6 devices to reach the other end, that's 6 opportunities for that packet to be dropped or delayed. Think of it like a game of telephone. The more people in the line, the more likely the message is going to be, "The cat is on the mat," by the time it reaches the end instead of "the stove is on fire."
Okay, so let's tackle Daniel's big question. The Wi-Fi analogy. In Wi-Fi, if my coverage is bad, I add another access point. They all talk to the same router, and my phone roams between them. If I'm in the garage, I'm on the garage AP. If I'm in the bedroom, I'm on the bedroom AP. Can I just stick 3 SMLI coordinators around my house and have one giant happy Zigbee family?
Short answer, number long answer, absolutely not. And trying will make you go bald from stress.
Laughs. Tell us how you really feel, Herman. Why not? It seems so logical. If I have an Ethernet-connected SMLite site in the basement and another one in the attic, why can't they just share the load?
Because of how the Zigbee protocol is architected. A Zigbee network is defined by a unique ID called a PAN ID Personal Area Network Identifier. By protocol definition, there can be only one coordinator per PAN ID. The coordinator is the trust center. It holds the encryption keys. It decides who is allowed to join. It's the source of truth for the entire network map. You cannot have 2 captains on the same ship. If you plug in a second coordinator, it starts its own, entirely separate network. It will have a different PAN ID, different encryption keys, and it will essentially be a stranger to the first network.
But wait, could I run 2 separate networks and just have them both feed into the same Home Assistant or MQTT broker? Like upstairs network and downstairs network?
You can, and that is actually the professional way to scale beyond the 200 device limit. You run network A on Zigbee channel 11 and network B on channel 25. They are invisible to each other. Your devices on network A cannot use routers on network B. They are 2 different silos. But since they both report to the same brain like Home Assistant, you can still create an automation where a button on network A turns on a light on network B. Home Assistant acts as the translator between 2 different foreign countries.
That sounds like a management nightmare for the average user, though. You have to remember which device is paired to which hub. If I buy a new sensor, I have to think, okay, am I in the kitchen? That's hub B. It's not roaming like Wi-Fi.
There is no roaming in Zigbee. Once a device is paired to a coordinator, it is married to it. It stores that specific coordinator's long address. If you move it to the other side of the house where a different coordinator has a stronger signal, it won't care. It won't see the other coordinator as a valid parent. It will keep trying to talk to its original coordinator until it dies of exhaustion, or you manually reset it and pair it to the new one. This is why the Wi-Fi comparison falls apart. Wi-Fi is designed for mobile clients. Zigbee was designed for static industrial sensors.
So if I have a massive property, like a farm or a mansion, and I can't do the multiple AP thing easily, what is the alternative? Daniel mentions using a coordinator in router mode. Is that the secret sauce? Can I turn one of those powerful SMLites into a super repeater?
That is a very clever workaround. You can take a high-gain device like an SLZB06, flash it with router firmware instead of coordinator firmware, and place it in a far-off garage. It connects back to your main coordinator over the Zigbee mesh, but because it has a massive antenna and a powerful radio, it acts as a super router for all the little sensors in that garage. It gives you that hub feel without breaking the one coordinator rule. It basically acts as a massive megaphone for the main coordinator.
But it's still limited by that one main coordinator's processing power and the 2.4 gigahertz interference, right? You're still funneling everything back to that single brain.
Yes, you are still sharing the same narrow pipe. This is why channel planning is so critical. Zigbee lives in the same 2.4 gigahertz neighborhood as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. There are only 16 Zigbee channels and only a few of them, like 15, 20, and 25, usually fall in the gaps between standard Wi-Fi channels 1, 6, and 11. If you scale up to 200 devices and you don't plan your channels, you aren't just fighting your coordinator's CPU, you are fighting your neighbor's Netflix stream. If your Wi-Fi is on channel 6 and your Zigbee is on channel 17, they are literally overlapping and screaming over each other.
I love that we're talking about channel planning for light bulbs. It really shows how far we've come from just screwing in a piece of glass and wire. It's like being a radio frequency engineer just to make sure the bathroom light turns on. But okay, if I'm an enthusiast and I'm hitting that 150 device mark and things are getting twitchy, maybe a light takes 3 clicks to respond, what is my move? Do I start pruning devices or do I go to the silo method?
The first move is an audit. Look for the chatties. This is the step most people skip. Go into your Zigbee 2MQTT dashboard and look at the last seen and the message frequency. Do you really need your washing machine plug to report voltage changes every 2 seconds? Probably not. You only need to know when the cycle is done. If you increase the reporting threshold, say only report if the wattage changes by more than 10 watts, you can cut your network traffic by 80% overnight. That clears up airtime for the stuff that matters, like motion sensors.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about signal to noise ratio. But what about the physical environment? I've heard people say that even the material of your walls can dictate when you hit that glass ceiling. Daniel is worried about.
Oh, absolutely. If you live in a modern house with drywall and wood studs, Zigbee is fairly happy. But if you live in an old European home with 2-foot thick stone walls, or a loft with reinforced concrete and rebar, your mesh is going to struggle. Rebar acts like a Faraday cage. In those environments, you might hit the scaling limit at only 40 devices because the coordinator is constantly rerouting packets that can't penetrate the walls. You end up with a very deep mesh with 5 or 6 hops, which, as we discussed, is a recipe for instability.
So in that case, Daniel's idea of multiple coordinators, the silo method, might actually be a necessity rather than a luxury. If you can't get a signal through the wall, you put a dedicated embassy in that room connected via Ethernet.
Ethernet is your best friend when physics is your enemy. If you have a detached garage or a basement bunker, don't try to mesh your way there. Run a Cat6 cable and put a second PoE SM light in that room. It's a separate Zigbee network, but Home Assistant makes it feel like one.
Let's talk about the hardware for a second. Daniel mentioned the SMLI site series. Why are these so popular compared to, say, a 15 USB stick plugged into a Raspberry Pi? Is it just the antenna, or is there more under the hood?
It's the delivery method. A standard USB stick has to be physically plugged into your server. If your server is in a metal rack in the basement or tucked behind a desk, your Zigbee signal is already starting at a disadvantage. Metal and concrete are Zigbee killers. The SMLI light units are Power over Ethernet, PoE. You can put them anywhere you have an Ethernet jack. You can put them in the center of your house, on the ceiling, or in a hallway, and they talk to your server over your rock-solid Ethernet backhaul. It decouples the radio from the computer.
That seems like a massive win for scaling. It lets you put the ears of the network where people actually live, not where the noisy fans and the server rack are. It's like having a central microphone in the middle of the room, instead of trying to listen through a keyhole from the basement. And they have those fancy web interfaces too, right?
They do. You can log directly into the SMLite's IP address and see the health of the Zigbee chip itself, independent of your automation software. It tells you the chip temperature, the RAM usage, and even has a built-in radio frequency signal analyzer. For someone like Daniel who is worried about hitting the ceiling, that data is gold. You can actually see if the chip is sweating before the lights stop working.
So, looking forward, do you think this is where Thread and Matter change the game? Because Daniel's frustration with the one coordinator limit seems like a fundamental flaw in Zigbee's aging design. Thread is essentially Zigbee, but with IP addresses, right? Does it solve the one coordinator problem?
Thread is a huge step forward because it is designed to be multi-hub from day one. In a Thread network, you have things called border routers. If you have an Apple TV, a HomePod, and a Google Nest Hub, they all act as border routers for the same Acoma Craig. Thread network. It is much more like the Wi-Fi mesh dream Daniel was asking about. If one hub fails, the others take over seamlessly. There is no single point of failure, brain-like there is in Zigbee. It's a more democratic system.
So Zigbee is the aging rock star who is great at a small club but struggles with a stadium tour, while Thread is the new kid designed for the arena.
That is a great way to put it. Zigbee is incredibly mature, it is cheap, and the device selection is massive. You can buy a Zigbee sensor for $5, but it's a single point of failure architecture by design. Thread fixes the captain problem by allowing multiple leaders on the same team. However, Thread is still in its awkward teenage years. The reliability isn't quite there yet, and the border router handoffs can still be a bit flaky depending on which brand of hub you're using. We've all seen the Matter horror stories where a Google hub and an Apple hub fight over who gets to control the light bulb.
But we're in 2024, and I still have a drawer full of Zigbee sensors that work perfectly fine. I'm not replacing them all for Thread just yet. It feels like Zigbee still has a lot of life left if you know how to treat it. I mean, if it's not broken, why fix it? Especially when Zigbee devices are so much cheaper right now.
Nor should you replace them. A well-tuned Zigbee network is still faster and more reliable for most people than an early-stage Thread setup. It just requires that junior admin mindset we talked about. Don't trust the self-healing marketing blindly. Be intentional about your routers. If you have a dead spot, don't just throw a light bulb at it, throw a dedicated, high-quality repeater. Keep your coordinator in a central location, ideally away from your Wi-Fi router, and don't be afraid to split the network if you're turning your house into a literal computer.
I think the practical takeaway for Daniel and the listeners is, check your device count. If you're under 100, you're probably fine with one good SMLI guide coordinator and a few decent plugs as routers. If you're approaching 200, or if you see that adapt a busy error, start looking at that second coordinator on a different channel. And for the love of all that is holy, stop using your smart bulbs as the primary backbone of your security system. If a guest turns off the lamp, your front door sensors shouldn't go offline.
Laughs, yes. Buy a $5 dedicated repeater, plug it into an outlet that isn't controlled by a switch, and save yourself the headache when someone accidentally hits the light switch. It's the cheapest insurance you can buy for your sanity. And remember, more devices doesn't always mean better mesh. Sometimes more devices just means more noise.
This was a deep one. I feel like I need to go home and remap my entire mesh now. I noticed my kitchen motion sensor took a beat longer than usual this morning, and now I'm wondering if my toaster is being too chatty. Or maybe my neighbor just got a new Wi-Fi router that's stomping all over my Zigbee channel 11.
I already did mine this morning. I found out my smart blinds were reporting their position every time the sun moved a millimeter. Every single percent of movement was a packet. I changed it to report only every 5%, and my motion sensors are back down to 12 milliseconds of latency. It's beautiful, Corn. The lights come on before I even realize I've walked into the room. It feels like living in the future again instead of living in a laggy video game.
Of course you did. You probably have a dashboard for your dashboard. I bet you have a real-time graph of your Zigbee packet success rate projected on your bedroom wall.
Don't give me ideas, Corn. I have a spare projector and a lot of empty wall space.
Well, thanks to Daniel for the prompt. This was a great dive into the mesh of it all, and a good reality check on the marketing versus the physics. It's easy to get caught up in the hype of infinite scaling, but at the end of the day, we're still dealing with radio waves in a very crowded 2.4 GHz spectrum.
Before we sign off, a big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure our own network stays up. He's the real coordinator of this operation.
And a huge thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the AI behind this show. Without them, we'd be doing this with a pen and paper, and nobody wants to hear that. It would be a very quiet podcast.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this dive into Zigbee physics and network architecture, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other nerds find the show. We love reading the reviews, even the ones that tell us we're too geeky.
You can find all our episodes, the transcripts, and the RSS feed at myweirdprompts.com. See you in the next one, hopefully with zero latency and a perfectly balanced mesh.
See ya. Keep those packets flowing.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird